Hey, it's great to see everybody. Happy Wednesday. Happy St. Patty's Day. St. Patrick's Day is actually very significant for our family. I think I mentioned this last week. My son Hank turned 6 today. So he's having the time of his life. He's a little redhead, faux Irishman. So
Right.
we love him though. We all wore green t-shirts in honor of his birthday today. So, and ate cake and ice cream before dinner, and it was fun. It was just a really good day.
That's
Um,
the best, Jake.
yeah, it's pretty cool. But St. Patrick was a cool guy. I could not recommend enough this little book called Let Me Die in Ireland. I don't know if any of you have been able to read that, but it's kind of a narrative retelling of the story of this man we now know as St. Patrick. And he was actually grew up in a family of British nobles and was kidnapped by Irish marauders, taken back to Ireland from England, and lived there as essentially as a slave for a number of years. Escaped, went back to England, and during that time, and as the influence of one of his fellow kind of workers on this Irish slaves on this Irish farm, ended up coming to this very deep faith in Jesus, went back to England. And when his time came, he actually decided he wanted to take the good news of Jesus back to Ireland. And he wanted to go set free all these people who had enslaved him. And not only is it this really kind of amazing story of one, he could have been re-enslaved in a heartbeat. If his old master had found him, they could have very easily put him back into servitude. But the idea that he wanted to free those who had enslaved him is just one of the most powerful stories in the history of the church. So today we are not celebrating a man who played a flute to lead rats out of Ireland. Today we are celebrating a man who decided to return to his land of slavery to offer people freedom. And it's a really amazing story, and one that hopefully will be inspiring to all of us. And if you get a chance, Let Me Die in Ireland is a really intriguing, fun page turner of a read. So I could not, it's like really great. Study your theology in the morning and then study Let Me Die in Ireland before you go to bed, because it's a great thing to think about before you go to sleep. So Sydney's actually going to help me teach tonight. She's got a few great things to add. So we're going to get to hear from her as well, which I'm very excited about. And let me just bring up my share sound, my keynote, and we'll go ahead and get started. If you do have a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 5, and we're going to look at verse 15 and 16 here in just a few minutes. I'm actually going to turn over there myself. Got my Bible out. Luke 5, and we'll be at 15 and 16. Thank you for everyone who responded as we send out that question about kind of as over the next 6 weeks, what specific disciplines do we want to make sure we are focusing on? And thank you, everybody. We're still kind of trying to tabulate those and come up with a great plan. What we'll probably end up doing, Sydney and I talked, is we'll do focus on two kind of Jesus and me disciplines and spend 1 week on each, and then spend 1 week more on just kind of going over all the Jesus and me disciplines that we didn't get to touch on, just kind of in a more brief fashion. And then we'll do 2 Jesus, my neighbor and me disciplines, and then spend a week going over the ones we weren't able to go to in depth. But as Sydney and I looked over your responses, one of the leading vocal, like just about everybody on their list, had this whole idea of silence and solitude. So that's actually where we're going to start tonight. Sydney and I want to do a little teaching on the concept and the idea of silence and solitude. So why, of all the disciplines, of all the different things we could focus on and spend, an evening setting our minds to, why is something like silence and solitude so important? And why, honestly, do we need to start here? Like, why is this a good place to start? And what I would say to this question and to you guys tonight is Silence and Solitude, along with Simple Living and Sabbath, are the most countercultural, some of the most countercultural, if not the most countercultural disciplines we can engage in. Silence and Solitude, as hopefully we're going to see, is antithetical to our American way of life, but is key to a Jesus following way of life. So I want to start off by illustrating this by telling a little story. 2 Christmases ago, as a result of a gift from some friends, actually a gift from our church up here, Bethany and my family and I were able to buy this thing called an Amazon Echo Dot. I don't know if you have any of these. It's this really brilliant smart speaker that Amazon put out that hooks up to our Amazon Prime account. And it's one of those things where I don't know if you've done this, where you go, Alexa, play, and then it just plays the song you said. It's awesome. It kind of sits as one of the focal points in our living area. The Ostrowskis are big fans of sporadic dance parties. But honestly, for me, music is a way I really enjoy relaxing. The kind of music I like listening to is actually very relaxing. Like, this is my favorite song. This song called Into the Mystic by Van Morrison, and it's just my favorite. It's the kind you just sit back on the corner of your couch and look up.
I lost Jake. Am I the only one?
Yeah.
Oh, Jake's frozen.
I think he.
All right, I'm back.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there you are.
Jake, can I say something? I just want you to know. I want you to know that you set off my Echo Dot. You
Oh
no! You really did. You set her name, and she started playing the music I was playing earlier.
Oh, that's the best. Well, there you go, Vicky. So it's a great gadget. But there's been I just love it. It just sets this really great tone and sets this peace. And honestly, it just allows my kind of soul to still and quiet for a little bit. But on more than one occasion, I'll be sitting listening to Van Morrison or Ray LaMontagne or something designed to kind of quiet everything. And all of a sudden, I will hear one of my children say, Alexa, play I Am a Gummy Bear, which sounds like this.
Oh, I'm a gummy bear. Yes, I'm a gummy bear. Oh, I'm a yummy, tummy, funny, lucky gummy bear. I'm a jolly bear, 'cause I'm a gummy bear. Oh, I'm a moving, grooving, counting, singing gummy.
So we'll stop there. Let me tell you, it only gets worse from there. Like, that song is it is loud and obnoxious. And the worst thing to happen to children's novelty music since like Baby Beluga. It will just drive you crazy. And what once was this peaceful, serene, soul calming experience, all of a sudden our living room is filled with noise. And not only noise, because what I found out is children under the age of 8 are not able to sit still and listen to I Am a Gummy Bear. Like, it's not the kind of song where you sit and contemplate the depth of its lyrical brilliance. Like, no, you just get up and start moving. And what was once still has now turned into a sound wave of I Am a Gummy Bear, combined with the frantic motion of 3 children ages 8 and under who started a mosh pit in the middle of the living room, and then the cries of a 4-year-old or 3-year-old who just got elbowed in the head by accident by her 8-year-old brother. It's just chaotic. Let's just say that. Jake's just chaotic. Sometimes it just feels like there is just no escaping from the noise. Like, it just seems like that is the way modern life is. that there is just no escape from the noise. Like we are just surrounded constantly by noises and sounds and images that are constantly keeping our minds and our hearts busy. Just think about things like email and text messages and phone calls and all the different notifications we get pushed to our smartphones or our tablets or our watches. Just think about how many times you get pings or other rings or other notifications just seemingly all day long. Our cell phones have become our new and most important appendage. It's easier to leave our keys sometimes when we leave the house than it is to leave our cell phone, because we just have become so accustomed to constantly having something grab our attention. But then we also have our televisions and our YouTubes and Disney Plus and Netflix and the ever-growing list of shows that we have to like stay on top of if we're going to be remotely culturally relevant. So whether it was Stranger Things for a while, and then last year, like the end of last year, it was like the Queen's Gambit, like you just had to be on top of that show to have any idea what was going on around you, and kind of that constant noise. And then there's social media. We constantly feel this pressure to stay up on what's going on around us. And then cable news. And then last year, for many of us who still have kids in the house, there was this constant noise of we're having to homeschool our kids. Like that was something I was wildly unprepared for at the beginning of 2020, is what would it be like to have to homeschool my children and to make sure they were getting some education and to relearn long division, because I didn't remember how to do that. And honestly, I still don't quite know how to do it, but my third grader seems to have a decent idea. But there's just no escape from all this noise. But the truth of the matter is, not only is there this noise that is going on around us that we're constantly getting inundated with, but there's also the noise that is just as real, but sometimes only we can hear. And it's the noise that constantly is going on in our heads and our hearts. A lot of times we have this noise of the never-ending to-do list that seems to get longer and longer and longer, and we can never quite make enough progress with it. We have all these unspoken and or unmet expectations, things we expect of ourselves, the expectations we feel other people have of us, friends and family and parents and our children, and the other PTA soccer moms or the other dads at work, or whatever the case may be. We feel this constant fear for the safety of those we love, that there's just so much going on in society and our culture, and how are we all going to figure it out? Guilt and shame sometimes takes up so much of our mental space and our minds and our hearts. Disappointment is another thing, kind of that constant noise of being disappointed, of unmet dreams and unfulfilled desires that we often have to deal with, that seem to plague us, that what if question that can often be really hard to shake. I know even this week, my wife had to grab my attention today, and she was just like, there's sometimes you just seem to zone off into nowhere, and I just can't get your attention. Like I keep talking to you, I just want you to acknowledge what I'm saying. And I love her, and she says some great stuff, but sometimes it's that noise that's just going on and on and on in my head, this chatter in my mind and my heart that is really hard to quiet. And here's what I've noticed too, is that often we turn up the volume on the noises that we can hear to quiet the clatter of those things that just go on in our hearts. Often we go to things like our podcasts or our TV or our cell phones and fill our minds and our hearts up with those things, because it's easier sometimes to deal with that noise than the noise that goes on in our own minds and hearts. Collectively, and I would say societally, we have just developed an addiction to distraction, developed an addiction to being distracted. We have lost the ability to quiet our hearts and quiet our minds and just to focus. Think of the last time you waited in line anywhere and did not pull your cell phone out to check something, to encounter something, to check a notification. Boredom is a thing of the past, but also too is interior depth to a big degree. One of my favorite writers, a guy named Ronald Rollhauser, talks about how our day and age, we are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. We are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. And the spiritual disciplines, though, as we talked about last week, are all about giving God access, primary access to our minds and hearts, about letting God and our relationship with God be the primary influence in who and what we are becoming. And unless we learn to slow down, to quiet our minds and our hearts, and to be still, it's going to be really, really hard for us to hear him. It's very hard to hear the voice of God when there's always noise going on around you. The great thinker and philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, "All unhappiness of men raised from one single fact, that they cannot sit quietly in their rooms." In other words, what he's saying is so much of what ails us and plagues us and is the cause of our lack of joy and dissatisfaction, we can trace back to the fact that we've lost the ability just to sit alone quietly. And I would add, just to sit alone quietly and be with God and let his presence be enough. So if that's true, if all those things are true, that's the direction society is headed, and that even as followers of Jesus, if I'm really honest, it's the area of, as I've noticed followers of Jesus in our fellowship and elsewhere, where we have conformed most to the pattern of this world. It's this constant going, never stopping, always filling our minds and our hearts up with noise, and lacking the ability just to sit alone and be quiet, just like everyone else. So if we're going to be the kind of people who can practice other disciplines, we need to be the kind of men and women who can learn to embrace and pursue silence and solitude, just like Jesus did. With that in mind, Sydney just is going to share a few things.
Thank you, Jake. Actually, I'm just sitting here really convicted by that. Because I feel like silence and solitude is one of the spiritual disciplines I'm not so great at. And but what I did want to share here is, last year, I know we did do some classes on the spiritual disciplines. And one of the things that really helped me understand and just picture the value of the spiritual disciplines and how they're meant to work in my life is the concept of creating space. And that was from, it's from a Bema podcast that I got to listen to, and many of you maybe have listened to it too, but it's just the thought of creating space in us. And you see it in the Bible, through the Bible, with creation. It's as if God created this space with creation, and then he said to man, you fill it. In Genesis 1, he said, it says, God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and increase in numbers, fill the earth, subdue it. So that was God's command to Adam and Eve. Okay, I made this amazing place for you. Now fill it. And the incredible plan worked for a little bit, and then humans messed it up. We sinned, the fall, the wheels came off the cart, and so we didn't fill it the way that God desired. And then later you see with the temple and with us, I think God reversed the plan. Okay, you create the space and I will fill it, God says. And he promises, actually. So with the temple in 1 Kings, you see Solomon has built the temple. It's amazing. It's incredible. It's chapters and chapters of detail. Finally, he has the Ark of the Covenant brought into the temple. And in 1 Kings 8, it says, when the priests withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord, and all the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple. You see, God filled the space that he commanded them to create. And then in the New Testament, of course, we are the temple. And we see that all through the New Testament. And one verse, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 16 says, don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit lives in you? And as Christians, we see this directive of you are the temple of God, and that God's Spirit will be in us, and that we will be the carriers of God's image, right? We're his image bearers. And so this idea of, in a way, it's a promise from God. If we create the space in us, he will fill it. He will fill it. And I especially find that concept for me true with when I think of silence. If I create the silence, that I make space for God to speak to me. The solitude, if I create that kind of silence in a way that God will come be my companion, I can picture that image. And I think too with fasting, when I fast, that I can see God filling then, like your desire isn't going to be for bread, your desire is going to be for me. And so I just see that for me, that concept of creating space really is, I guess, a description that helps me understand how if I do that, the more I can strive to do that, the more God will work. He will do the transforming. There will be room for him to work in me and in us each. So I just love that idea and wanted to share that.
Amen. Thanks, Sid. That's awesome. And that's language that you will hear more tonight, and the creating space language. Sydney mentioned that to me, I think, yesterday when we were chatting, and I find that language to be super helpful to think about what I'm trying to do as I give God my time and creating space for him to create space in me. I love that. So ultimately, we see in Jesus an amazing example. Dallas Willard, who I love and is one of my favorite writers, was once asked to describe Jesus in one word. And I think if all of us did that, we could think of a myriad of different words. In some ways, it's hard to describe Jesus in just one word. I'm sure love or peace or kindness, I can't, what would be some of the words that would come up? But when Dallas Willard, who is this USC philosophy professor, one of the great Christian minds of the last couple hundred years, was asked to describe Jesus in one word, the word he chose was relaxed. He decided to describe Jesus as relaxed. Now, I remember the first time I heard that, I had a little bit of an aversion to it, but then I thought about it. I'm like, no, that makes sense. Jesus never was in that big of a hurry. Jesus allowed himself to like, there was never anything that seemed to bother, like in terms of like when people brought something to Jesus's attention, it never seemed to annoy him. Except when God's honor was at stake, Jesus remained patient and spoke to people with a kindness that was unbelievable. Relax seems like a very apt way to speak about Jesus, that he just was able to keep a spiritual disposition in the face of a lot of different things. And honestly, the face of a lot of the same things that we face day in and day out. So that brings me to Luke chapter 5. And I just want to point out something in Luke 5, verses 15 and 16. And here's what the Bible says. Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their illnesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So what we see here is that Jesus's life, like ours, was also filled with the perpetual hum of people asking him for attention and needing his help. I love that, is that this news about him spread and the crowds came more and more to hear him. They wanted to hear his teaching and to be healed of their illnesses. That there was always someone seemingly who was trying to get Jesus' attention and trying to get his focus, that needed a healing, a word, forgiveness, his time, his attention. There was very rarely a time that we see, apparently at this point, where there weren't crowds gathered around Jesus creating this noise that a lot of us can experience. But what is it said is Jesus, in the face of all the noise and the face of all the constant distraction, a lot of it wasn't bad. In fact, a lot of it was really good. It was loving people and serving people and healing people and bringing kingdom to bear on the lives of the people around him. But Jesus himself had a spiritual discipline. Jesus himself had a practice he would often participate in to counteract the effect of the constant rush to grab his attention. And it says this: he often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. And I think Jesus knew something really important, that in order to maintain his lifestyle of love, in order to maintain this lifestyle where he was selflessly able to give himself to others, and what we now know as agape love, selfless, self-sacrificial love that Jesus took to the nth degree, that Jesus took to the cross, but he also did day in and day out. In order for him to maintain his ability to selflessly give himself away, he needed to allow himself time to get away to be with the Father. That we know that Jesus took frequent trips to what the gospel writer Luke says here are the lonely places. Now in Greek, this word for lonely places is the Greek word eremos, and it can be translated as desert or wilderness or quiet place or lonely place. And what you see as you actually study the Gospels is often, I mean, on seemingly every other page of these first century biographies of Jesus, you see Jesus either by himself or with a small group of close friends slipping away from the crowds, from the noise, from the distraction of his day-to-day life and ministry, so he could enter into the quiet place, the desert, the wilderness, the lonely place. And it was here that Jesus would meet God. Let me just give you a few such examples. You can just write these down. I'll go ahead and read them for you. Mark chapter 1 and verse 35. Here's what we see. Mark 1 verse 35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place. That's a word. Went off to the eremos, where he prayed. And then if you jump down, or I'll jump down to Mark chapter 1, verse 45. It says, instead, he went out and began to freely talk, spreading the news, this good news of the kingdom. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but it stayed outside in lonely places. He stayed outside in the eremos. Yet people still came to him from everywhere. And another example is in Mark chapter 7, verse 24. It says, Jesus left the place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. So he entered this house with the desire to be alone by himself. One of my professors from grad school identified 14 different times in the Gospel of Mark alone where Jesus retreated either by himself or with a small group of friends, a small group of close friends, into these quiet places to get away, to just be with God. Now, it's important to know Jesus was not trying to escape life or responsibility. One of the other things that plagues modern society is escapism. is the desire just to run away and get away from the things that are important. Jesus was not an escapist. He did not go to the lonely place to get away. He went to these quiet places. He went into the eremos to be alone with God so that then he could return prepared to live and give life to the full. What Jesus did in the lonely place in the eremos was allow himself to be filled up so that then he could go and pour himself back out. Jesus was not an escapist, but he also knew his own limits, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and the indescribable value of just being with God to refill. Jesus developed what we'll call a rhythm of eremos, a rhythm of eremos, a rhythm of escaping to the quiet place and then returning to the life and ministry God had given him. And this rhythm of eremos in kind of the spiritual discipline and spiritual formation language is what we now call silence and solitude. This idea of getting away into the quiet to be by ourselves, our own rhythm of eremos. One of my favorite writers is a guy named John Mark Comer, and he defines silence and solitude in this way. He says it's an intentional time in the quiet to be alone with ourselves and God. In Matthew 11, Jesus offers us his yoke. And when Jesus offers us his yoke, he's offering us to teach us and train us how to live life as he lived so we could become like he was. And central to Jesus's way of life was silence and solitude. Central to Jesus' way of life was developing his own rhythm of eremos, exiting the noise to get into the quiet, to just be with God. So if that was important, Jesus said, by taking up his yoke, we too will experience rest, the kind of rest that he and only Jesus can offer and give to us. So if Jesus needed such a rhythm, if God become man, who was 100% God and 100% man, but if Jesus needed such a rhythm of getting away into the quiet, we need to develop such a rhythm as well. We need to develop our own rhythm of eremos, our own rhythm of silence and solitude. So here, before we get into some practicals, here are just a couple of what I'll call encouragements or admonishments. It depends on how you take them. But the first is this: you will only grow so deep without silence and solitude. You will only grow so deep without silence and solitude. This is true for a number of reasons. One is you can only grow as deep as your primary influences. Like your depth will only get as deep as the person or the things you allow to be what shapes you. And if God is not what is shaping us, if the world is what is shaping us, if our own habits, if our own whatever is shaping us, then we will only grow as deep as those things. But if we give and we learn to give God our undivided attention, then we will grow deeper to be like God. And here's something really important. Unless you learn to give God your undivided attention, you will be a spiritually shallow person. There's just no way around that. Unless you learn to give God your undivided attention, you will be a spiritually shallow person because you will not allow God to do his work on your mind and heart. You will not create space for God to do his work on you. The other thing about all this too, in terms of how silence and solitude allows us to grow deep, is silence and solitude also creates space to do a number of the other key practices and key spiritual disciplines. It's hard to study your Bible if there's noise going on around you all the time. It's hard to pray if your mind is always wandering to 1,000 other things. Now, we'll talk about different types of prayer we can do to help sharpen our thinking. But it's hard to do a lot of the other spiritual disciplines, meditate on the word, do deep study, pray, all these different things. It's hard to do them unless we get away and learn to be quiet. Because otherwise you can do a discipline and it not be spiritual because you haven't actually invited the Spirit to be a part of it. Because you haven't given the Spirit access and the right to come and take over things. So it could be a discipline. It could be a mental discipline, an emotional discipline, but it won't be a spiritual one unless the Spirit gets the access to your mind and heart. And without silence and solitude, that just won't happen. The great writer Henry Nouwen said this: without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and listen to him. And to that, I say amen. The second kind of admonishment I would give us, just something to think about or encouragement, is you must experience divine love in order to love others well. God notices every act of love you show to others. It's one of the things I deeply believe. And the older I get, and I'm still a young man, but the older I get, the more I realize that getting credit from other people is way overrated, and getting credit from God is way underrated. And I just want to encourage you to say, a lot of us show intense acts of love that no one will ever notice or give you thanks for. Caring for a sick parent, caring for a sick child, caring for a sick spouse, giving money to the homeless man or woman you encounter and work, sending a note or a letter to a friend who's grieving, a simple phone call, or sitting with someone just to let them know you are there. Studying the Bible with someone till really late at night, even though you have to get up to go to work the next morning, making a meal, cleaning up the dishes, taking out the trash, going, whatever. We can go on a million different things. Taking vacation time to go to Albania. I know that it's deep on the heart of the Worcester Church to help and love Albania, which is incredible. Every one of those things God notices and God will reward. And that's awesome. So you may not feel thanked, and you might not on this side, but God notices and God will reward. So do not give up. But let me say this too. Our capacity to love is not endless. We all have a capacity. We know it. And maybe you reached yours today. Often our capacity is further along than we think it is. I'm a runner. There's times when I'm feeling really tired, and if I just decide to take the long way, I actually find I had it in me the whole time. That if I decide to take the 5-mile route instead of the 3-mile route, by mile 3.5, I'm like, oh, I feel great. I can keep going. But all of our capacity, none of us have an endless capacity. Thus, we must deliberately be refilled. We must deliberately be refilled. And as those who are in the business of offering divine love to others, the only thing that can refill that in us is experiencing divine love ourselves. And I think that is one of the great values of silence and solitude, is it is an opportunity for you to allow yourself to be loved by God. For you to allow yourself to take time, to breathe in deep, to focus on God, and allow him in the myriad of ways that he does to remind you of how deeply you are loved, and then show you how deeply you are loved in simple, profound ways, namely in the experience, the simple experience of his presence, of knowing God is there. And for all of us who have been through life, we know that sometimes the most loving thing someone can do is just be there. And God's an expert at that. God is an expert at just being there. And silence and solitude allows us to realize he's been there the whole time. And he wants us to know that and experience that and appreciate that. This is how Richard Foster says it. Like Jesus, we must go away from people so that we can be truly present with people. The fruit of solitude is increased sensitivity and compassion for others. There comes a new freedom to be with people. There is new attentiveness to their needs, new responsiveness to their hurts. And I think Jesus would affirm that. I think that's one of the reasons Jesus would frequently get away, is he needed to be refilled with divine love so that he could therefore give that divine love away to other people. And Sydney wants to make a few comments on this.
Yeah, I love this quote. And when I had seen Jake's notes earlier, and when I read over it, it instantly made me think of the movie Castaway, which I know is not a spiritual movie, but for those of you that have seen it, and Jake has not seen it, and so he must. But it makes me think of that movie because, you know, that was Tom Hanks, and you know how the story goes. He's an obsessively punctual FedEx exec, you know, totally living his life by a clock. He has a friend whose wife has cancer, and he seems to just like kind of give pat answer recognition of the pain that his friend is going through. Anyways, he gets, you know, his plane crashes. He ends up on an island for 2 or 3 years, and he comes back and he's a different person. And talk about the epitome of solitude. He's by himself. And he comes back, and the whole story is amazing, not just his survival, but who he comes back at is just a different person. He is sensitive. He's compassion. He has compassion for his friend who's lost his wife. And it's like, he actually listens to people. He doesn't live by a clock anymore. And so it's like his whole character has changed. And I just thought, it makes me think of that movie, this quote does, and the power of what solitude does to bring out maybe that actual connection with people and sensitivity, because, you know, the noise has gone away. So anyways, I just thought I would share that. And yes, somebody said, Wilson.
So I am familiar, like I know Castaway exists. I've just never, and I know like all the cultural references are ubiquitous at this point. I just need to sit down. It was recommended. I need to sit down and watch it. So with that having all been said, hopefully that gives us ample motivation to pour time in silence and solitude. Here's a couple practicals. I don't think either of these are going to be particularly profound, but hopefully these things will help. Number one, having a daily quiet time. Quiet time has become pretty, I would say it's a cliche at this point. Oh, do you have your quiet time? Tell me about your quiet time. And here's the thing about cliches. Cliches are cliches because they're true largely, but cliches become easy to ignore and they get devalued after a while. We have this cultural obsession with things that are novel. Like we love new. C.S. Lewis called it chronological snobbery. He says, we just think that the newest thing is the greatest thing. And quiet time has been fundamental to our practice of Christianity as a fellowship for decades and decades, so much so that you hear it over and over and over again, that you forget what a significant thing we're actually being encouraged to do, and how we are being encouraged to follow the pattern of Jesus, who we know at least once got up early in the morning and went off to a solitary place by himself to pray. So I am one of those people who always like the novel. I'm one of those people who naturally is a contrarian. So I want to say, yeah, well, I'll show you there's a different way to do it. And I would say the best decision I've made the last half decade was a decision I made probably 3 or 4 years ago to start getting up before my family in the morning. So my alarm goes off every morning. And I know for some of you, this won't be anything outrageous, but for me, this was a profound decision at the start. but I started getting up at 5 a.m. So we bought our boys one of those alarm clocks that glows green when they're allowed to come downstairs. So they can wake up at 5:15 if they want to, but they're not allowed to come downstairs until that clock glows green. And they know from till 6 a.m. is daddy's time with Jesus. So I wake up in the morning at 5. As you can imagine, I go into the kitchen and make my fancy cup of coffee because it's a great way to celebrate the beginning part of the day. I sit on the corner of my couch. I sit in the same corner of the couch. Sometimes I often use a blanket. Even I put a big pillow on my lap because I prefer to rest my books on my lap. I have my Bible and my notebook. I have my phone just because I have an app for the Bible meditation exercise I do in the morning. And that helps out, but I don't check my email. I don't check my text messages. And I don't do serious Bible study. There's a different time, and my position in the church affords me the ability to spend other time doing serious Bible study, but that time is just relationship time with God. I read. This last big chunk of time, every day I do a exercise called Lectio Divina, which it means divine reading in Latin, and it's just a systematic way to meditate through a passage. I journal. I pray through that passage. I do another thing called fixed hour prayer, where I start my day off just reading a number of psalms and different prayers to help set my mind on God. But it's all just an opportunity to start my day off before anything else gets going in eremos and silence and solitude, just me with God. And honestly, it's changed everything, because now by the time my boys come downstairs at 6 or whenever, I'm excited to see them because I've been filled up with divine love. So I have the opportunity to give that divine love away. I know just one example of how meaningful this has been to me. Last fall, we had this week where my son Hank actually broke his arm twice last year. Broke the same arm twice. And the second one he broke it right in front of me. He tripped over a kink in the rug on the couch, or on the floor, I'm sorry, and fell right next to where I was and got up, and it was obvious his arm was broken. Let's just say it like that. And this one week he broke it for the same time and needed to have surgery. I had recently just finished my grad program, and my student loans had just kicked back in, and that was something I was not quite prepared for. I had gotten some feedback on a teaching I had done right around that time. And honestly, I was just feeling pretty discouraged. And, you start to question, am I actually good at this? I thought I was, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I missed my calling. And because of a trip I had taken out of town, my daughter missed her first picture day. So we don't have official school pictures from her first year of school. And those were just a few things. So I just had this week where I was feeling really disheartened and really sad. And there was a Wednesday morning, I woke up and I opened my Lectio Divina app, and it was Psalm 144. And in Psalm 144 in verse 15, David said, "Blessed is the people of whom this is true. Blessed is the people whose God is the Lord." And I read through Psalm 144 over and over and over again for about 10 minutes, but no matter how many times I read it, this is the part where God kept grabbing my attention and would not let it go. And as I sat there with these words and with this idea from God, the Holy Spirit started imprinting a really simple idea into my heart. And that was this: Jake, you are blessed because you have me. And that was just, I sat there with that idea. Jake, you are blessed. Even in the midst of what was honestly a really challenging week, Jake, you are blessed because you have me. It calmed my heart. It quieted the noise. And in that moment, I felt and knew I am loved. And you're just more prepared than ever to go out and give love to other people. Now, that may not be the best routine for you. That's what I do. But I do think, brothers and sisters, if we're serious about our spiritual lives, we need to be serious about giving God quiet time, ideally first thing in the morning, to center our minds and our hearts and our beings on him, so that we can be loved by him, so that then we can go and love other people. So no matter what that specifically looks like, and we'll talk about other disciplines you can fill that quiet time up with, but no matter what that looks like, taking the time and saying, God, I am going to give you, no matter how early I have to wake up, I'm going to give you that first part of my day. That will be part of my rhythm of eremos. And just quickly, number 2 is the idea of retreat. Sometimes that hour every day, and continually doing that hour every day, is indescribably important. But sometimes we just need more. Sometimes we just need more of God. Sometimes we need more quiet, more silence, more solitude. And retreat is a time where we get away, where we get out of our normal routine, where we set aside a specific amount of time to get away from where we live, and ideally into some place. Nature is awesome. Just to spend extended time with God, extended time in silence and solitude. When we hear retreat, a lot of times in our church culture, retreat is just another way of saying a miniature conference. So retreat is, we'll go to a retreat center and we'll have 5 lessons and fellowship time and an extended time of singing. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But that's not what I'm talking about here. Here, we're using retreat to mean time for you to go away and just be with God by yourself for an extended period of time. So what I started doing, and COVID threw this off a little bit, but what I've tried to do, last year excluded, is do a quarter. Every quarter, I try and do an overnight. There's great things. One of the best parts about Airbnb is it makes getting away a little bit more affordable. So I've just tried to go get an Airbnb, usually for a night. And I live on the seacoast in New Hampshire. So I'm 20 minutes from the beach. And particularly in like November, and say between the end of September and the beginning of April, no one is trying to go stay by the beach. So it's extra quiet, but it's also beautiful. And I'll get away. What I like to do is I like to plan it out. I'll literally go hour by hour. Here's what I'm going to do. I have some flexibility with all that, but I like to plan hour by hour. Here's what I'm going to read. Here's what I'm going to focus on. Here's what I'm going to go for a prayer walk. Because for me, that just helps that to be a more valuable time. So if I try and get there the middle of the afternoon and stay till the next, say, mid-morning, it's okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I try and eat good food because, again, I think food's a way to celebrate. There's a couple in our church. They have a little vacation home up near Augusta, and I've gone there and they have a great kitchen, and I just got to make myself a meal. Even the act of cleaning it up was retreat, because I just love getting to clean and just enjoy the quiet. It's kind of a time to go to bed whenever your body tells you to stop, because sometimes in retreat, what God wants you to do is say, you're exhausted. You need to go to bed. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So there's been many times where I planned on doing things till 9, 10 o'clock at night. I couldn't keep my eyes open. So I closed my Bible and put it aside and climbed into bed. And that's okay. It was God saying, I love you enough to make you go to bed. Like we do with our children sometimes. It's, I love you enough to make you go to bed. And that's a beautiful thing. And then, I wake up the next morning, have some more scheduled time. I'll often, because these are really beautiful places, I'll often love to go for a run and listen to a sermon or some spiritual music, whatever's going on. And it's just a great time to get away. So some of you maybe can't do an overnight, but you live in Central Mass. There's such beautiful places in Central Mass where you can just go away for a day and take your car out to a national park and pack yourself up, have a picnic for you and God, and set him a place on your blanket. I don't know if I put a sandwich on there, but just set him a place, because there's just something about this recognition that God is here, and I want to recognize with my physical surroundings that I know he's here. Or whatever the case may be. Just getting away for a morning. whatever it is, but taking periodic time to say, I love my time with God in the morning, my silence and solitude, but often I just need more. And I would say this too, the more consistently you're able to do your mornings, the better your retreats will be, because you'll just be used to being with God. And that's true. Like if you're married, as some of us are, your date nights are better if you've had time to connect with your spouse through the course of the week, because you don't spend the first hour of your date getting reacquainted with the fact that you enjoy one another's presence. Like that's been established. So now you can just hop into everything that's great about just being together. And I do think that's the same with you and God. So you got to figure out what works for you, but at least every quarter, taking that extended eremos time and developing a rhythm of your own. Let me say one more thing with this, and then if Cindy wants to add anything, absolutely. You cannot create space in your heart without making space in your schedule. That is just the reality of things. You will be giving up something valuable by prioritizing silence and solitude. But what you get back, intimacy with God and transformation, is exponentially more valuable than what you might be giving up. So make the space in your schedule and let God use the space in your heart to transform you. So silence and solitude, brothers and sisters, it is worthwhile, and it's what we probably need now more. Introvert, extrovert, whatever. It's probably what we need now more than ever. Sydney, if you have anything to add, please do. Any practicals, whatever. And then I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen here.